The night my fiance's mother threatened to call CPS on me, she thought she had found my weakest point. I was just a quiet single mom with no social media, no flashy job title, and a baby on my hip. She believed I needed her approval, her money, her protection. What she did not know was that I had been letting them underestimate me from the very beginning. I acted broke. I acted harmless. I let them talk about stability and standards while I kept my real life hidden. The problem was, when she decided to use fear to control me, she forced me to do the one thing she never saw coming. I told the truth. And that was the moment everything in their perfect family started to fall apart. My name is Alina Moore, and this is what happened when I stopped playing small. Chapter 1. They thought I was just a struggling single mom. I met Daniel Whitaker on a quiet weekday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that makes the suburbs of Chicago feel smaller than they really are. The sky was low and gray, the parking lot half empty, and I remember thinking that this was exactly the kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. I was 34 at the time, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a paper cup of coffee in the other. Daniel held the door for me without hesitation, smiled at Liam like it was the most natural thing in the world, and asked if I needed help. I did not tell him much that day. I never do at first. I let people see what they expect to see. A single mom, quiet, careful with money, no ring on my finger, no polished confidence, no stories about ambition or success, just a woman doing her best. Liam was 1 year old then. He was not my son, but I never corrected anyone who assumed he was. Liam belonged to my best friend Sophie, who had gone through a brutal postpartum period that left her barely able to function, let alone care for a baby on her own. 12 months earlier, she had signed a temporary guardianship authorization so Liam could stay with me while she focused on getting stable again. It was legal, clear, and documented, but not something I explained unless I had to. In most conversations, that detail only made things complicated. Daniel did not ask. He did not flinch. He did not look at me with pity or calculation. He just knelt down, made a silly face at Liam, and asked his name. That was how it started. We dated quietly for months. No big gestures, no social media posts, dinner at home, walks through our neighborhood, conversations that stayed comfortably on the surface. He worked as a sales manager for a regional automotive group, stable, not flashy. He never asked how much I made. I never volunteered it. That silence felt safe. Eventually, he invited me to meet his family. His parents lived in a well-kept house in a suburb where lawns were trimmed weekly, and everything looked intentional. When I pulled into the driveway, I remember checking the rearview mirror and noticing how out of place my car looked among the clean lines and neutral colors. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself I was imagining things. Margaret Whitaker opened the door. She was warm in the way people are warm when they believe manners are a form of control. Her smile was practiced. Her eyes were not. They moved quickly, taking inventory. My shoes, my coat, the stroller, Liam. Lauren Whitaker, Daniel's younger sister, lingered in the background, phone in hand, watching without saying much. Thomas Whitaker, Daniel's father, gave a polite nod and returned to his chair. He was not unkind, he was simply distant, as if reserving judgment until more information arrived. Dinner was already set when we sat down. Candles, cloth napkins, a bottle of wine I did not recognize. Margaret poured generously, then placed the bill for the wine club on the counter nearby. Not hidden, not emphasized, just present, as if it belonged there, as if I was meant to notice it. She asked about my work. I told her I worked in dental services. She tilted her head slightly and asked what that meant. I explained in simple terms. She nodded, then asked about long-term plans. I said I was taking things one step at a time. She smiled again, softer this time, and said that stability was very important, especially for children. Lauren asked if I was on LinkedIn. I said no. She raised her eyebrows and asked how I stayed connected. I said I preferred to keep my life private. She laughed lightly as if that answer was a joke she didn't fully understand. Throughout the meal, Margaret kept returning to Daniel, his future, his potential, the kind of life he deserved. She spoke about family values and tradition, about the importance of choosing wisely, about how hard it was to recover from mistakes once certain paths were taken. None of it was directed at me directly. All of it was about me. Daniel squeezed my hand once under the table. It was a small gesture, but I noticed it. I also noticed that he didn't say anything. On the drive home, he asked if I was okay. I told him I was tired. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. That night, after Liam fell asleep, I sat alone in my living room and thought about everything that had been said without being spoken. I thought about the way Margaret had positioned herself as the gatekeeper of her son's future. I thought about Lauren's questions designed to reveal something she could use later. I thought about Thomas, watching and waiting. I also thought about what they didn't know. They didn't know that I worked nights at Preston and Hale Dental Lab, crafting restorations that required precision most people never noticed. They didn't know that I was finishing my DDS coursework part-time, balancing exams with feedings and bedtime routines. They didn't know that earlier that same week, I'd been offered a case worth more than most people made in a year. They saw what I allowed them to see: a woman with a stroller, a modest life, no visible power. I didn't hide the truth because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I'd learned what happened when you led with it. Years earlier, my former fiancé Ryan told me he was proud of me right up until the moment he realized my success made him feel small. He left right after. He called it incompatibility. I called it a warning. So I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I was paying attention. As I turned off the lights that night, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. This was not about fitting in. This was about watching what people did when they believed I had nothing to protect myself with. And I was willing to wait a little longer to see who they really were.
Chapter 2. Every smile had a price. I did not have to wait long. After that first dinner, Daniel's family became a regular presence in my life. There were birthdays, Sunday lunches, casual drop-ins that were never really casual. Each invitation arrived wrapped in politeness, always phrased as concern, always sounding optional even when it was not. I went because saying no too often would have been noticed, and being noticed in the wrong way felt more dangerous than being uncomfortable. Margaret changed her approach. She no longer watched me like a stranger. She watched me like a project. At the next family lunch, she asked if I had ever considered something more stable for work. She said it gently, as if offering advice instead of judgment. She mentioned a dental office owned by a friend of hers, something predictable, good hours, not too demanding, perfect for someone with responsibilities. She emphasized the word responsibilities while glancing at Liam. I thanked her and said I was comfortable where I was. She smiled, but her eyes narrowed just enough to let me know I had failed a test I did not know I was taking. At another gathering, she brought up budgeting. She talked about how young families often struggled because they did not plan well enough, how easy it was to live beyond your means without realizing it. She asked if I had thought about long-term security, about retirement, about what would happen if something unexpected came up. The questions landed one after another, each one reasonable on its own, all of them together forming a quiet interrogation. Lauren was more direct. She asked why I did not have LinkedIn. When I said I preferred not to share my professional life online, she laughed and said that was unusual these days. She asked how people verified who I was if I did not leave a digital trail. She said it like a joke, but she was watching my face carefully, waiting for a reaction. I learned quickly that every smile came with a price. If I accepted Margaret's suggestions without hesitation, she became warmer. If I declined, she grew cooler, more distant. The affection was conditional, and the conditions kept changing. Behind all of this, my real life continued to exist, mostly unseen. Most nights after Liam went to sleep, I drove into the city and worked late at Preston and Hale Dental Lab. The lab smelled like disinfectant and warm resin, a place where focus mattered more than appearances.
I specialized in complex restorations, the kind that required patience and precision, the kind that people trusted you with when there was no room for mistakes. My schedule was flexible because my work was valuable. That flexibility was something I did not talk about. I was also finishing my DDS coursework part-time, evening classes, weekend exams, studying at my kitchen table while a baby monitor hummed beside me. I was close to the finish line, closer than anyone in Daniel's family would have guessed. One afternoon, Dr. Preston Hale called me directly. He told me about a full-mouth restoration case that had just come in. High profile, difficult, worth more than most people made in a year. He asked if I could take it. I looked at my calendar and saw that the case overlapped with Daniel's mother's birthday dinner, an event Margaret had already mentioned twice and marked as very important. I told Dr. Hale I could not commit. There was a pause on the line, not disappointment, just surprise. He said he would find someone else. I hung up and felt something twist in my chest. That was the real cost of the role I was playing. Not pride, not secrecy, time, opportunity. The next weekend at the birthday dinner, Margaret was in high spirits. She greeted me with a hug that felt performative, introduced me to her friends as Daniel's girlfriend and Liam's mother without asking, and spent most of the evening telling stories about Daniel's childhood. She talked about sacrifices, about standards, about how important it was to surround yourself with the right people. Lauren hovered nearby, listening, occasionally chiming in with comments that sounded supportive but carried an edge. She mentioned how hard it must be for me to juggle everything, how impressive it was that I managed at all. She said at all more than once. Then Liam spilled water on the living room rug. It happened in a second. One careless movement, a tipped cup, clear liquid spreading across fabric. I moved immediately, apologizing, grabbing napkins, lifting him out of the way. The spill was small, easily manageable. Margaret froze. Her reaction was out of proportion to the situation. Her face tightened, her voice sharpened. She asked what kind of cup I had given him, why I had not been more careful, whether I realized how expensive the rug was. She waved away my apologies and began blotting the water herself, her movements tense and aggressive. The room went quiet. I realized then that this was not about the rug. It was about control, about something unexpected happening in a space she believed she governed completely. Liam had disrupted that illusion, and by extension, so had I. I apologized again, quietly, sincerely. No one defended me. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Lauren watched with interest, as if cataloging the moment for later use. On the drive home, Daniel said his mother could be particular. He said she didn't mean anything by it. He said she just liked things a certain way. I nodded. I did not argue. Arguing would have required explaining things I was not ready to explain. That night, after Liam went to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my notes spread out in front of me. Dental anatomy, occlusion patterns, case studies, the work that actually defined my life. I thought about the way Margaret reacted, the way Lauren smiled, the way Daniel had stayed quiet. I thought about Ryan years earlier, about how he had started out proud and supportive, how that pride had curdled into resentment once he understood what my success meant. I remembered the moments I realized he needed me to be smaller so he could feel secure. I wondered if I was repeating the same pattern just with different faces. For the first time, doubt crept in, not about them, but about myself, about how long I could maintain this balance, about whether waiting was still observation, had crossed into avoidance. And then I remembered Margaret's questions, her suggestions, her concern that was not concern at all. I remembered Lauren's fixation on my silence, her need to place me somewhere she could understand and therefore control. If I had told the truth from the beginning, none of that would have changed. It would have just taken a different shape. As I cleared the table and turned off the lights, I accepted something I was resisting. The discomfort I was feeling was not a sign that I was doing something wrong. It was a sign that I was seeing clearly. I was no longer just waiting to see who they were. I was beginning to understand exactly what they expected me to be.
Chapter 3. When help turns into control. I did not have to wait long to understand how that first dinner had changed things. After that night, Daniel's family did not step back.
They stepped closer. Birthdays, Sunday lunches, small gatherings that were framed as casual but never truly were. Every invitation came wrapped in warmth and concern, always sounding optional, always carrying the expectation that I would show up and be grateful. Margaret shifted from observation to instruction. At the next family lunch, she asked about my job again, not in a curious way, but in the tone of someone diagnosing a problem. "You know," she said while setting plates on the table, "a friend of mine owns a dental office nearby. Very stable, normal hours. It might be easier for someone in your position." She glanced at Liam as she said, "your position." "I like where I work," I replied. I kept my voice even. She smiled, the polite kind that never quite settled. "Of course, I just worry. It's hard to plan a future without predictability." That word came up often. Predictability, stability, responsibility. Always delivered gently, always aimed directly at me. Lauren watched from the other side of the table, legs crossed, phone face down. She waited until Margaret stepped away before leaning in. "So, you really don't have LinkedIn?" she asked. "No," I said. "That's unusual," she said lightly. "Most people want to be visible. I prefer privacy." She tilted her head. "Privacy or secrecy?" Daniel shot her a look. "Lauren." She raised her hands. "I'm just asking." I learned quickly that every smile had a cost. If I nodded along to Margaret's suggestions, she became warmer. If I pushed back, even politely, she cooled. The affection came in installments, and I was expected to earn each one. Meanwhile, the parts of my life they never saw continued in parallel. Most nights, after Liam fell asleep, I drove into the city to Preston and Hale Dental Lab. The lab was quiet, precise, unforgiving in the best way. I worked on restorations that required absolute focus, the kind of work where there was no room for ego or pretense. My schedule was flexible because my results mattered. That flexibility was something I never mentioned. I was also finishing my DDS coursework part-time, evening classes, weekend exams. Notes spread across my kitchen table while the baby monitor hummed beside me. I was close to the finish line, closer than anyone in Daniel's family would have guessed. One afternoon, Dr. Preston Hale called me directly. "We've got a full mouth restoration coming in," he said. "Complex case, high value, I want you on it." I checked my calendar. The dates overlapped with Margaret's birthday dinner, which she had already described as very important. I hesitated longer than I should have. "I can't commit," I said finally. There was a pause. Not disappointment, just surprise. "All right," he said. "I'll assign it elsewhere." When I hung up, I felt the weight of that decision settle in my chest. That was the real price of the role I was playing. Not pride, not secrecy, opportunity. At the birthday dinner, Margaret was radiant. She hugged me a little too tightly, introduced me to her friends as Daniel's girlfriend and Liam's mother without asking, and spent most of the evening talking about family values and standards. She spoke about sacrifice, about choosing wisely, about how some paths were harder to correct than others. Lauren stayed close, adding comments that sounded supportive but carried an edge. "It must be exhausting," she said at one point, smiling, "doing all of this on your own. I don't know how you manage it all." She emphasized "at all" just enough for me to notice. Then Liam tipped his cup. The water spread across the rug in a thin, clear line. I reacted immediately, apologizing, lifting him, blotting the spill. It was small, manageable. Margaret froze. Her face tightened, and the warmth vanished. She scolded me sharply, asked why I had not been more careful, reminded me how expensive the rug was. She waved off my apologies and knelt to clean it herself, movements tense and angry. The room went quiet. I realized then that it was not about the rug, it was about control. Something unexpected had happened in a space she believed she governed completely, and she did not tolerate disruptions. I apologized again, softly. No one defended me. Daniel looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. Lauren watched with interest, as if filing the moment away. On the drive home, Daniel tried to smooth it over. "She's particular," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." I nodded. I did not argue. Arguing would have required explaining things I was not ready to explain. That night, after Liam was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my notes spread across in front of me. Dental anatomy, case studies, the work that actually defined my life. I thought about Margaret's reaction, Lauren's smile, Daniel's silence. I thought about Ryan years earlier, how his pride turned into resentment once he realized my success made him feel smaller. I remembered how quickly support could turn into control when someone needed you to be less. For the first time, doubt crept in, not about them, but about myself, about how long I could maintain this balance, about whether waiting became avoidance. Then I remembered Margaret's questions, her suggestions, the way every offer of help came with invisible strings. If I had told the truth from the beginning, none of that would have disappeared. It would have simply taken a different shape. As I cleared the table and turned off the lights, I accepted something I was resisting. The discomfort I felt was not a warning that I was wrong. It was a sign that I was seeing clearly. I was no longer just waiting to see who they were. I was beginning to understand exactly what they expected me to be.
Chapter 4. The truth changes everything. What they expected me to be was someone who would keep absorbing discomfort and still call it respect. After Margaret brought up CPS, my body stayed on high alert for days. Every unknown number on my phone made my stomach tighten. Every knock in the hallway made me freeze for half a second before I remembered where I was. Maya Brooks had warned me that a threat did not have to be carried out to do damage. Just saying it was enough to make you watch your own life like you were under a microscope. Daniel tried to make things better. He helped more with Liam. He checked in more often. He apologized in that soft, earnest way that made me want to believe love could smooth out anything sharp. But there was a new tension between us. Not distance, more like a hairline crack you keep stepping around. One night, after Liam finally fell asleep, Daniel sat on my couch and stared at his hands. I talked to my mom. I waited. "She says she was just trying to protect me," he said. "She thinks you are hiding things." I swallowed. "I am." His head lifted fast. "Elena." I held his gaze. "Not what she thinks, not about Liam, not about my home, not about the way I feel about you. But I have been letting your family see a version of me that feels safe to them." "Why would you do that?" he asked, and I heard hurt beneath the confusion. I took a breath. "Because the last time I led with the truth, I paid for it." He did not push then, but the silence between us felt heavier than any argument. 2 days later, Margaret invited us to dinner again. Everyone would be there. Thomas, Lauren, a couple of her friends, the kind she liked to have around when she wanted the room to remember who mattered. My first instinct was to say no, to protect the little piece I still had. But avoiding her would not make her less dangerous. It would make her more confident that she could keep shaping the narrative. So I told Daniel I would go, but I set one condition. "I need you to listen," I said in my kitchen while Liam babbled in his high chair. "Not just to your mom, to me. And if tonight goes the way I think it will, you have to choose." Daniel went still. "Choose what?" "Whether you want a life with me or a life your mom controls." He exhaled sharply. "That is not fair." "It is real," I said. We arrived just before 7. Margaret greeted us with a smile so polished it could have been carved. "Daniel, sweetheart," she said, touching his arm. Then she turned to me. "Elena and Liam, come in." Lauren sat at the table with her phone face down, like she had been waiting. Thomas stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, watching quietly. Margaret's friends smiled at me the way strangers smile when they are deciding whether you belong.
My first instinct was to say no, to protect the little peace I still had, but avoiding her would not make her less dangerous. It would make her more confident that she could keep shaping the narrative. So I told Daniel I would go, but I set one condition. "I need you to listen," I said in my kitchen while Liam babbled in his high chair. "Not just to your mom, to me. And if tonight goes the way I think it will, you have to choose." Daniel went still. "Choose what?" "Whether you want a life with me or a life your mom controls." He exhaled sharply. "That is not fair." "It is real," I said. We arrived just before 7. Margaret greeted us with a smile so polished it could have been carved. "Daniel, sweetheart," she said, touching his arm. Then she turned to me. "Elena and Liam, come in." Lauren sat at the table with her phone face down, like she had been waiting. Thomas stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, watching quietly. Margaret's friends smiled at me the way strangers smile when they are deciding whether you belong. Dinner started with small talk. Weather, work, neighborhood updates. Margaret was careful, almost too careful, like she knew she had pushed too hard last time and wanted to try a softer grip. Then she set her fork down and looked right at me. "I've been thinking about trust," she said. Daniel tensed beside me. Margaret continued. "Families work when people are honest, when there are no secrets, when everyone is clear about what they are building." Lauren gave a small smile, like she could already see the end of the story. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, not dramatically, just firmly. I placed it face up beside my plate. Margaret blinked. "What is that?" "A choice," I said quietly. Daniel looked at me, confused. I kept my voice steady. "I work at Preston and Hale Dental Lab. Not part-time, I'm a senior dental prosthetist. I build restorations for complex cases." Margaret's smile faltered. Lauren lifted her eyebrows. "Okay." "I make enough to support myself and Liam without anyone else's help," I said, "and I'm finishing my DDS coursework in an evening program. I'll be done within a year." Silence pressed down on the table. Margaret stared at me as if she was trying to solve a puzzle she hated. "You told us you worked in dental services," she said. "I did. I simplified. I did not lie." Lauren leaned forward. "So you hid it?" "Yes," I said. Daniel looked stunned now, like the floor had shifted under him. Margaret snapped back from shock into anger. "So you lied to my son," she said. "You let him think you were struggling. You let him step in and play hero. That's manipulation." I felt my pulse in my throat, but I kept my tone calm. "I did not ask your son for money," I said. "I did not take anything from him. I did not trap him. I kept my finances private." Margaret leaned closer. "Why?" I tapped my phone screen and turned it toward her. A simple call log. Dr. Preston Hale. Timestamped. The night I missed her gathering, the missed calls, and the message that pulled me back into the lab. "I missed your event because my lab called me in for an emergency case. I chose my work. You treated that like a personal insult. This is proof I was not making excuses." Margaret stared at the screen. One of her friends shifted uncomfortably. Thomas watched without speaking. Daniel stared too, then looked at me, voice low. "Why didn't you tell me?" Because I was afraid of what it would do to us," I said. "I've been punished before for being successful." Margaret scoffed. "Punished?" I nodded. Ryan Collins, my former fiancé, left because he couldn't handle that I earned more than he did. He called it pride. It was insecurity, and I learned to protect myself. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "So you decided to test my son?" "I decided to protect myself," I said. "There's a difference." Daniel swallowed hard. "You should have trusted me," he said. "I wanted to," I said softly, "but trust is hard when someone in your family says CPS like it's a casual suggestion." Margaret's face flushed. I was concerned. "No," I said, and my voice stayed calm. You were trying to control me. When politeness didn't work, you reached for fear." The room went still. Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. The sound of it against the floor cut through the silence. "Mom," Daniel said. Margaret lifted her chin. "Daniel?" He looked at her and his voice shook slightly, like he was stepping into a part of himself he had avoided. "You don't get to threaten Alina," he said. "You don't get to bring up CPS. You don't get to decide whether she fits. If you can't respect her, you can't be in our lives the way you want to be." Margaret turned to me, fury sharp in her eyes. "You're turning him against his family," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No, Mom, you did that." For a moment, I thought Margaret would explode. Instead, she stood slowly, gathering herself, pride first. "This is not over," she said. Daniel did not respond. He simply reached for my hand. We left without another word. Liam slept in his car seat, breathing softly, unaware of what had just been drawn in permanent ink. Back at my apartment, Daniel sat on my couch again, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted. I sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him, far enough to keep the truth between us. "You don't have to fix it tonight," I said, "but you do have to see it." He nodded once. I listened to Liam through the baby monitor, steady and safe, and I understood something with painful clarity. The truth had not solved anything. It had only removed the last place for anyone to pretend everything was fine.
Chapter 5. Karma is quiet, but it lasts. What came next did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, the way real consequences usually do. For a while, nothing seemed different on the surface. Daniel went to work, I took Liam to his pediatric appointments and finished my shifts at the lab. Life kept moving. But beneath that calm, something had shifted, and it showed itself in small, unmistakable ways. Margaret stopped calling. At first, I thought it was temporary, the kind of silence people use to regain control. Then weeks passed. Invitations that used to arrive automatically did not come anymore. Daniel mentioned that a neighborhood fundraiser Margaret had been heavily involved in was suddenly being run by someone else. When I asked why, he shrugged and said there had been a misunderstanding. Later, the details filled themselves in. Margaret had always relied on her reputation in the local real estate circle. She was known for hosting, for connecting people, for knowing which doors opened quietly and which stayed closed. But reputations built on control do not survive scrutiny well. Word traveled the way it always does, not through dramatic announcements, but through pauses and sideways glances. A dinner invitation was withdrawn without explanation. A committee meeting she expected to lead went forward without her. A woman she had once dismissed stopped returning her calls. No one confronted her directly. They simply stopped centering her. Daniel did not tell me everything. He did not need to. I saw it in his posture when he came home after seeing his parents. I heard it in the way he spoke about his mother now. Careful, measured, no longer defensive. Lauren lost interest just as quickly as she had once been fascinated. She stopped watching my stories because there were none to watch. She stopped asking questions because there was no longer a performance to critique. Without access to control the narrative, she drifted away. Her social media presence stayed busy, but her influence over our lives disappeared entirely. Thomas surprised me the most. He started checking in quietly, without commentary. A short message asking how Liam was doing, a note about a book he thought I might like. He never brought up his wife, never apologized on her behalf, never asked me to smooth things over. His respect came in the form of restraint, and I accepted it for what it was. Daniel and I talked more than we ever had before. Not dramatic conversations, not declarations, but real ones. About boundaries, about what support actually looked like, about the difference between concern and control. We set rules that felt strange at first because neither of us had ever needed them. No discussing our finances with his family, no sharing schedules, no explaining choices that did not affect them,
no visits that came with conditions. If help was offered, it had to come without strings. If that was not possible, we did not accept it. It was not romantic, it was necessary. Liam remained untouched by the conflict, exactly as it should have been. His paperwork stayed current, his routines stayed stable, his world stayed small and safe. Sophie continued to recover, slowly, steadily, grateful that she could do so without fear hanging over her shoulder. I finished another set of exams and scheduled the last phase of my DDS program. The work grounded me. It reminded me who I was when no one was watching, when no one was measuring me against expectations I had never agreed to meet. Daniel never asked me to reconcile with his mother. He did not ask me to forgive her, or to give her another chance, or to be the bigger person. He understood now that those phrases were often just another way to push responsibility onto the person who had already carried too much. When we did see Margaret again, months later, it was brief and controlled. No accusations, no warmth, just distance and formality. She no longer spoke as if she had authority over our lives, and I no longer felt the need to defend myself. That was the real change. I realized one afternoon, while watching Liam nap in the late light, that I did not feel victorious. I did not feel like I had won anything. What I felt was lighter. I was no longer bracing for the next comment, the next suggestion, the next test disguised as kindness. I was no longer calculating how small I needed to be to keep the peace. I was not waiting for approval that would only ever arrive if I surrendered parts of myself. Karma had not been loud. It had not been cruel. It had been precise. Margaret lost the thing she valued most, not her money or her comfort, but her ability to shape everyone around her. And she lost it because she reached too far, too openly, and revealed exactly who she was willing to hurt to stay in control. The truth had not fixed everything, but it had done something far more important. It had made pretending impossible. If you've ever been in a situation where silence felt safer than honesty, where being underestimated felt like armor, where family dynamics crossed into control, I would love to hear how you handled it. Where did you draw your line, and what happened when you did?